Welcome to Givers, Doers, and Thinkers. Today we talk to businessman and philanthropist Dean Riesen about his efforts to deliver access to clean water in Tanzania and what the rest of us can learn from his efforts. Let's go. Givers, Doers, and Thinkers introduces listeners to the fascinating people and important ideas at the heart of American civil society. We speak with philanthropists, nonprofit leaders, social entrepreneurs, historians, journalists, and anyone else who will help us understand contemporary civil society's achievements and failures. We also sprinkle in practical advice for nonprofit leaders and fundraisers. My name is Jeremy Beer, and thanks for joining us. All right. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Givers, Doers, and Thinkers. We are recording on February 2nd, 2022 in blustery, cool, but sunny Phoenix, Arizona. I'm sure there aren't many of you out there who will feel sorry for us having a slightly cool day on February 2nd. And we are honored to have with us Dean Riesen. Dean is the managing partner of Redrock Partners, LLC, a private equity investment firm. And as part of the firm's work, he has served as the chairman of restaurants where you have dined, including Romano's, Macaroni Grill, and Famous Dave's of America. Prior to Redrock, Dean was the chief financial officer at a major holding company, all of which is to say he has a highly impressive record in the business world with a number of firms in a number of sectors. He's one of our givers and also one of our doers and one of our thinkers here for this podcast. The sector we're going to talk to Dean about today, though, is the nonprofit sector, specifically the Tanzania Water Fund, an organization that Dean founded and for which he serves as the chair. The Tanzania Water Fund has completed over 35 community-based water systems in the Singida region of Tanzania. And if I said that wrong, Dean will correct me here shortly. And has been very successful in this work. And that's not always easy to do. Africa, and not only Africa, as I'm sure you know, is littered with development projects that have not worked out well. And those failures sometimes make philanthropists wary of investing on the continent. So I'm thrilled to have Dean on so that we can pick his brain and learn from his experience. Dean Riesen, welcome.
Thank you, Jeremy.
It's great to have you on. And to talk to us about the Tanzania Water Fund and what you're doing. But let's start with your professional background. Just if you could just give a little bit of how you came to be chairman of Macaroni Grill. What does it mean to be chairman of Macaroni Grill or Famous Days of America? What does one do in such a situation?
Well, my background really starts, I grew up in Iowa as a Presbyterian minister's son. And the most notable thing about my youth was I did spend a year in Perth, Western Australia as a Rotary exchange student. Kind of opened my eyes to the big world. I saw all the capitals of Asia and, lived in another culture, albeit English speaking, for a year away from my parents when I was 16. So that kind of set my pathway. I then went to college at Cornell College in Iowa. Econ and politics major. Those are both passions of mine. One is the way I make money, and the other is the way I spend a lot of my time. I went immediately to work for the Pella Window Companies, literally the day after graduating as a financial analyst. Moved on to Ramada Inns, based here in Phoenix, international hotel and gaming company, publicly traded at the time. And they sent me to Europe. So I spent a couple of years in Europe as the treasurer of their international subsidiaries. And then I was recruited to go to Minneapolis to work at Carlson Companies. And they were the owner of Radisson's, TGI Fridays, Carlson Travel, Carlson Marketing Group, and about 50 other companies. And I ended up becoming the president of Carlson Real Estate, which was a large developer and investor in commercial, office, industrial, retail, and hotels, of course, all of those being Radisson's. And that was, I spent about 20 years with them and ended up being the CFO of the holding company and oversaw all the financial businesses. From there, I moved on and decided to start my own business, moved back to Phoenix. My wife and I loved it here. And meanwhile, I had joined the board of Famous Days, a small public restaurant company, and ultimately became the chairman. And then at a point in time, left that and acquired with another investor, Romano's Macaroni Grill. Took it private and took it through a restructuring, and I served as the chairman there. I guess then I started, or at the same time, I had a commercial real estate development business here in Phoenix. We had moved to Phoenix by then, and called Rimrock Partners, and then have recently, or I guess in 2015, not that recently, started Redrock Partners, and we acquired a partner, and I acquired Romano's Macaroni Grill at that. I'm involved now in senior housing development with Redrock Partners, and that's really the professional story. And I've loved every minute of it. I love my experiences in Australia and Germany, and I love living in different places in the United States. I don't have a favorite. I love all the places I've been. So
it's an amazing variety of sectors you've been active in your business career. How did you go from all that to getting involved in philanthropy, maybe generally, but specifically in Tanzania?
Yeah, I am. First of all, the Carlson family. Well, first I was a Presbyterian minister's son, so I was sort of exposed to the concept of Christian charity from a very early age. So that really planted and watered the seeds. And then the Carlson family, when I worked at Carlson, I reported directly to the family, and they were incredibly generous, starting with Kurt Carlson, the founder, his daughters, son-in-laws, and grandchildren. And so the environment was one of which they were very successful in business, and they were very successful in charity work. And they believed they could, and they had the ability to make an impact, and they worked very hard at it. And so they were really role models for me. And as I said, I was there about 20 years. And so when I approached about my 40th birthday, I read the book called Halftime by Bob Buford. And it was really, I'll summarize the book to being, it's all about moving from success to significance. And that turning point in your life could be as early as 40 to 45, when you decide there's more than just adding zeros to the net worth and accomplishments for the resume. Now it's time to make a difference with all the opportunities and gifts that you've been given. And so I really took that to heart. And about the same time, Bill Gates had retired from Microsoft and was going to devote his whole rest of his life to changing the world, both his financial life and his intellectual life. And that, he was also a role model. And so in that kind of environment, I was given the opportunity to join 4 businessmen on a trip to Eastern Africa. And I'd always wanted to go to Africa, and a mission trip. And the focus was to visit about 30 World Vision micro projects. And then based on what we saw and what we learned, sponsor 5 of them for 3 years as a group. We would kind of vote on which ones we wanted. These were existing projects that every year looked for renewed funding. And so the group of 5 made significant donation each year for 3 years to support it. So it made our trip not just to see, but to kind of be actively involved. And why does this work? Why didn't this work? And that really, again, planted a big seed with me. And a couple of years later, one of the people I had gotten to know, a young Tanzanian named Lazaro Nialandu, got himself elected to parliament. And he invited me to come back to Tanzania. I visited Tanzania, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda. And he had convinced me to come back to Tanzania. And I was planning to look at small scale kind of capital investment, business investment in existing successful Tanzanian businesses, because I had learned in my first trip, the capital markets are just very inefficient. And most people can only grow their businesses with the retained earnings that they've created in prior years. So they can grow, but it's very slowly. And so I went on this trip, and it was a great trip, but I learned that unless I was willing to spend half my time in Tanzania, it would not be a successful way to be an investor. So, and by the way, I wasn't willing to spend half my time, nor was my wife and family willing for me to do so. So
right.
that on that very trip, he took me out to his rural home in what I would call the Iowa of Tanzania, central Tanzania, very agricultural, no cities to speak of. And he exposed me to a water project the Japanese government had just completed. And so I saw the impact on one village of a deep well, a storage tank, and a pumping facility, and how it dramatically changed the outcome of, well, it was changing, it had just happened. And his region was horribly deficient in human water. The clean water was 400 to 500 feet deep. So it was a very expensive proposition to bring it to the surface and store it. And so that was really what launched me into water. I had no intention of doing charity. I had no intention of doing water. But a friend of mine says God puts doors in front of us, and occasionally we pay attention, and even rarely we walk through. And I guess I walked through one of those doors because it's just changed. You know, that was over 20 years ago, and it's just changed my life ever since.
Tell us a little bit about then exactly what you're doing then. How does the Tanzania Water Fund work? What makes it unique, if anything? What are you doing differently than maybe some projects that haven't worked so well in Tanzania or elsewhere have tried?
Well, I don't want to disparage anyone else, but it is true. When I travel in Tanzania, I see a lot of broken down water projects, broken down agricultural projects. And so every time I saw one, I asked the question, what happened? And every answer I got taught me something about what not to do. And most of them revolve around a lot of development activities in the third world. We're very big on the initial capital investment. It's relatively easy to raise money to build a well, but it's not that easy to raise money to support the well once it's built, and or to train the people to support it themselves. And we have to remember that these people are very primitive. They live in mud and thatch huts. Their only farming implement is a piece of iron with a hole in it that they jam a stick through and call it a hoe. That is the extent of the agricultural development. So giving them a modern water system and asking them to maintain it, take care of it, doesn't seem that hard to us, but it's like sending them forward 500 years from where they're operating at. So it's a much more difficult to develop the whole concept of maintenance and reinvestment. The development people call it sustainability. So now it's 20 years ago, it was just beginning to be discussed. Now everyone talks about how, if you do a project, how do you make it sustainable and how do you make it owned by the local people? So, because a lot of projects were sort of dropped out of the air by well-meaning Americans and Brits and Germans, but they were just expected to operate without any kind of human infrastructure around it. So what I really learned is we have to go much further. We have to have relationships with the villages. We have to come back. We have to send in Tanzanians to do training and then come back and coaching and critiquing and improving. And over a number of years, you can develop this sustainability. But that was really the biggest thing that we did different. The other thing that we did different, I think, is we focused on one district. The district, it's part of a region. You mentioned the region. So we focused on the North Singida district, which is equivalent to a county. It'd be like Maricopa County in around Phoenix. So it's large, but not too large. And so all of our projects have been within that county. One of I mean, it's one of the poorest districts in Tanzania, which is one of the poorest countries in the world. So it's certainly deserving. But most charities kind of, follow the projects all over the country. But this way I could get to know people. I've been to 70 villages. I've been to many of the villages 5, 6, 7 times. So people remember me. They've seen me many times over the last 20 years. And that helps a lot. It makes developing and maintaining these much better.
Yeah, it sounds like that is really one of the keys to your success. What I'm hearing you say is you've been on the ground there multiple times. This is not something you're not personally involved with. You have to get to know the people very in some depth. It also sounds like it was a sort of an iterative process to figure out how to develop wells and that would be sustainable, because you have to develop the sort of training around it. Like, it sounds like that took you some years to do, and then the scale is restricted. Is that sort of like the secret sauce? Like, you have to bring all those things together if you're trying to do something like this,
I think
to really make it.
The other thing is, as a business person, I come to it differently than people that have made their careers out of charity. And it's not better or worse, it's just different. So, I believe that, the problems are problems, but many problems can be solved. They just need different thinking. And a lot of the traditional thinking was all about inputs, not outputs. So one of the things I bring to the table is I want to measure outputs. So if we build a well, what does it accomplish in the community? And we just don't accept it can't be done. I mean, there's a way to do almost anything. You just haven't discovered it yet. The other thing that we've done that's helped our effort, partly because we concentrate, is we actually do research. So I sent a Tanzanian college grad, to every village in this district to inventory their water situation. Do they have a well? When was it built? Is it working? If it's not working, what part of it's not working? How many people are in the village? How many households? Is there a school? How many students are in the school? Just to get a way to kind of measure the villages. And that research allowed me, and I'll get to it a little later, talk about how we prioritize projects. We were able to evaluate each village and determine which village had a greater need, and then we would do that project next. And, we listed them all, 60 to 70 villages that need some sort of water project, either rehabilitation of an existing one, or more often than not, kind of a new one.
Who owns the well when it's put in, Dean? And do residents pay a fee for the water that comes from it? How does ownership kind of enter into the picture?
Good question. Basically, the community owns it. So we develop it, and at the end of the project, we gift it to the community. They've provided the land because we have to identify the most likely spot to get to water. So they've usually acquired it from a farmer. So we usually get an acre or so of water around the well site. And then we donate it to the community. The community, under their own government law, is required to have a water committee, a sort of water utility board as a subsidiary of the village government. And they then take ownership and management of it. And it's with that water committee that we develop our relationship. We usually have a short contract that says what we're going to do and says what they're going to do. And yes, part of our requirement and part of the government's requirement is that they do charge a minimal amount for water, because the only way to sustain the water is to be able to fix problems. And the only way they're going to have money, because these are $1 a day people that earn $1 a day, roughly.
Right.
So there is really no margin. And when they do that, and they almost all do it, a few don't, they're problematic, they have excess cash reserves for the first time in their village history. And they are able to repair their problems that occur, and sometimes do more than just help the water project. So it's worked well, but it's worked a lot better in recent years than it did at the beginning.
Like most things.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be right back talking to Dean Riesen about the Tanzania Water Fund. Right back. All right, time for a little practical advice. Happy to have with us today my colleague, Michela Petrosino. How are you doing today?
Hi, Jeremy. Good. Thanks for having me.
Michela is a proud alumna of Villanova University, where she studied communications, and she is a consultant with us here at American Philanthropic. And we are going to talk a little bit about creative ways to cultivate your supporters, your donors, cultivate a relationship with them. So, Michela, what do you got for us on that score?
Sure. Let's just start with a few best practices first. You will have to have a lot of what I like to call polite persistence. People will ignore you. They won't pick up. They won't respond to the email, but that's okay. Keep going, and just sending that out and them seeing it is important, even if they don't respond.
This is mail, email, no matter what you're sending out.
Correct.
Don't take it personally when people don't get right back to you.
Mm-hmm. Your organization is probably not at the top of their mind. Everyone gets busy with their family, their work, and that's okay. You don't have to be their first priority every day. Then I would say build a relationship like you would with a friend. You can be casual and eventually down the line, perhaps text them. But you reach out to a friend, maybe it's not on a daily basis, but you connect over things that you have in common. And if you see a relatable article or you go on a hike and you know that this friend or donor likes doing that, maybe send them a picture of the view, things like that. Connect on things other than just your organization.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think people often get very formal in their donor communications plans and streams and forget to do the normal things that you would do with somebody who you're friendly with. Mm-hmm. That's really good.
So then I would also say an easy way to just make something personal is forwarding the mass email that you're sending out, but write that personal note above. Say, I just wanted to make sure you saw this. I know you like XYZ, and we just published this new article.
Right. Excellent. That's fantastic. It seems so. The theme here so far, and I know you probably have more, but is being less formal, being informal and personal in the outreach. Is that right?
Exactly. We don't want to be too stuffy and regimented. On a similar note, when you are meeting with donors, you don't want every meeting to be a solicitation. Yeah. In our 2021 fundraising performance survey, we show that more cultivation means more money raised from those donors. So we say that the healthiest ratio of solicitation to non-solicitation, mail and meetings as well, is typically 1-to-1.
Okay.
79% of organizations surveyed also used handwritten notes, and 36% used donor surveys. So both of those are great ways to cultivate your supporters. But for the non-major donors, maybe your mid-level and smaller people, they don't typically have a great way to give you feedback or share any of their own feelings or ideas. So having that donor survey is a great way to let them have a larger part in your organization for them to feel heard.
Yeah, I didn't even remember that percentage myself, but I like the point about donor surveys because it's it does give people a chance to feel like they're listened to be engaged. And I think we have found too that I filled one out recently for the public radio station that I give a small amount of money to here. It was like a 50 item survey. It was way long, and I did it. I did it. And so and we often will do that with clients I know where it's a longer survey, maybe not 50 questions, but 20 or 25 or 30.
Sure.
And people will be surprised at
How many
what
responses?
yeah, right. Right. It's not always a low response rate to things like that.
Right. So then getting into a few more cultivation ideas, sending people a birthday card, or for your major donors, even perhaps flowers on their birthday, just showing that you remember them and you're thinking of them for their own big moments in life. You want them to be there for the organizations. So then, like we're saying, in a friendship, you would be there for theirs as well.
That's great. Anything else, Michela?
Yeah, I would say sending gifts at end of year is pretty common, but do try and make them unique and useful. I had a client of mine who wrote a letter and shared a story about a little girl in her lemonade stand and kind of talked about that, and then sent out honey from their own garden, from their own bees.
Yeah.
So doing things like that where you can tie it in, or if you just send a nice gift that is useful, that's always great. Maybe for higher level donors, a customized pen, not the cheap ones you get from the dentist, but a nice one, or a coffee mug and coffee beans with a pun on there, things like that. They'll appreciate and use, and when they see that every day, they'll think of you.
Yeah, it's great to have your logo and name kind of in their lives. remember you just like a friend, like a photo on the wall of the desk. Well, that's great stuff, Michela. Thank you very much. Polite persistence, treat people like you would a friend, be casual and informal. All good advice.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.
All right, we are back with Dean Riesen, managing partner of Redrock Partners, and more to the point of what we're talking about here today, chairman of the Tanzania Water Fund. Dean, government just came up there a little bit. How do you interface with the Tanzanian government on all of this, and what do they think about what you're doing or what others are doing like you in their country?
We don't interface a lot, although it appears, I was just there in October, that may change. They've really not been a player. Their government has historically been pretty massively corrupt. And while they have a water ministry and water departments in each region and district, I hate to say it, but they're really paper pushers and not doers. And it's partly, Tanzania was a socialist country for 20 years, and there's still a residual kind of socialist approach to work and capital, et cetera. And so they are happy that we do this because they don't have the resources or the willpower to do it. So they don't stand in our way. But in the past, they didn't really help us at all. That is changing, which has made me, quite optimistic about the future, because they've determined that water is such a critical resource, which we all know. Something like 60% of the rural people in Tanzania do not have access to clean water. That they spun it out of the political structure into more or less a public utility and hired just professional water engineers and professional people who are managed not for political purposes, but based on supplying more and more water to the people. So that all of a sudden has opened up a lot of partnership options, which we never could pursue before.
Are there any villages that don't want you to come in? Are there any on that end, on the recipient end, the Tanzanian end? Is there any ever controversy about building a well? Is there any cultural differences here that are so hard to overcome that it creates conflict? Anything like that?
No, I've never run into that. I mean, water is such a need, and it's such a negative impact on not having it on people's lives and it's been going on for generations, that no, they are so excited to be the next one on the list. And when I visit villages that don't have water, they're just like all over you, wanting to be the next one on the list. So, that's never been an issue. Tanzania is a from a religious standpoint, a mixed country, about 50 to 60% Christian and 50 to 40% Muslim. They don't really know. And, some villages that I do business with are led by Muslims and some are led by Christians, and most of them are a mixture. And so religion tends to be they are very supportive. The pastors and the imams are all very supportive of water and supportive of what we're trying to do as far as sustainability of the water and helping us teach the people how to take care of these projects. One of the things we did our first, I suppose, 5 to 7 years, our projects had diesel generators as the power source. Now we've exclusively gone to solar. And while we all know solar is a lot more environmentally friendly, that's really not an issue in rural Tanzania. The benefit of solar is it's a much simpler system. It's not mechanical, it's more digital. It has fewer moving parts, which mean fewer things wear out, means less maintenance. It's really a closed system, and essentially, if it's sunny out, they push a button and the well starts pumping water into the storage tank, and they pump until it's full, and then it usually takes 2 or 3 days for that tank to be drawn out. There are usually water taps near the tank, and the people come to the tank to get their water in that village. Yeah.
Are you trying to track any of the downstream outcomes or impact as a result of having this water in these villages?
Yeah, it really fits my model of, what are the outputs, not what's the input. A lot of charities focus on how much money they raise and spend. I want to focus on how many lives we impact and other tangible things. So I've kind of developed a concept I've called human return on investment. And so it's just like in business where you invest a certain amount of capital in an asset and you're looking for a financial return on investment and a recovery of your investment and return beyond the recovery. Here we look at, we're going to spend roughly $45,000 to $50,000 putting in this full system, a 500-foot well, storage tank, solar power, pump, etc. And so what's the return on that investment? Well, we're not going to measure it in dollars. I mean, the dollars collected to sell the water on a per liter basis basically covers its maintenance. So what our return is, the World Bank says half the healthcare problems in Africa are solvable with clean water. So you don't need a hospital, you don't need a clinic, a doctor, a nurse, even a dispensary. You need clean water first. You solve half the healthcare problems in a village. So that is enough on its own. That's a human return on investment, And you can quantify that by saying, before and after, there are this many deaths from this and this many sick kids. The other thing I identified, and it's now being broadly identified, is water is a huge economic development black hole. And what I mean by that is each household is spending 4 to 5 hours a day, one person, 4 to 5 hours a day, round trip, to find water and bring it back to the household. So if you multiply 5 hours times 600 households times 365 days a year, you're well over 1 million labor hours being, in a sense, wasted in every village. And in an economy, in a primitive economy, the main input, economic input, is labor. There's very little capital. So if you're taking 1 million labor hours to go fetch water, That's 1,000,000 labor hours that typically is split 1/3 children and 2/3 women. And so the children who are freed from water fetching, they get to go to school when they wouldn't have. So they're going to get a much better, they usually go to school, but they miss a day every week or 2 days. They are out now in school the full week. And the 2/3 of the labor hours that are women, they basically double the productivity on the family farm. So they can literally double the income of the family farm by not having to fetch water. So those are the two key human returns on investment for making a $50,000. You solve half the healthcare problems in a village, and you save 1,000,000 labor hours that are now going to go into development. And you literally can see that in a village 3 to 4 years after the water project's been put there. There are more metal roofs, there are block walls. You can visibly see the wealth is growing. So that's really, what has motivated me. And I've attracted a lot of other similar thinking business people who hear about this. They ask to come on a trip. Maybe they come, maybe they just listen to a presentation, and then they want to donate and get involved. And that's why I formed the legal charity, is because so many people wanted to join up and give money, but they wanted a tax deduction. So we were able to do it this way.
Yeah, that way you had no intention, if I'm correct, really building an institution here. You just wanted to.
I just was going to do what I could do. That was my plan. But some people would say God had a different plan.
This is a good point to mention, probably, that you have a partner in this sort of organizationally in World Serve International. Is that correct?
Right.
And how do you work with them?
Well, it's an interesting history. I heard this is 15 years ago. I was out in Singida visiting villages, as I do. And by the way, I keep track of that. I have an Excel spreadsheet. I know when I visited each village, et cetera. That's the way I am in business. And so no surprise. And I heard that there had been 3 wells drilled in 3 villages that were just drilled and capped. They weren't developed. So that's about half drilling the well, encasing the well, putting plastic PVC pipe in the well so the walls don't collapse. That's about half the total cost of doing a well. So I dug into it, and this American charity, founded by a group of Assemblies of God businessmen, had decided their gift was to actually create a well drilling company in Tanzania, because at the time there was only one company. You might wait 3 or 4 years to have your well drilled after you gave them a deposit of 50% of the total cost. So they decided to expand the capacity to drill wells, and then they had worked with Assemblies of God churches, and they raised money, and they would just go out and drill wells. At the time, they weren't developing them. They would hope that the village and the government would raise the money to finish the project. So I heard about these 3 projects, and a couple of friends and I were on this trip together. We all decided we'd just develop those 3 wells. We didn't want such a great asset that was producing 0 water to go to waste. And we looked at it and said, this is great. I wonder if we could make a relationship with these guys. And I met their president at the National Prayer Breakfast the following year. And I told him about the research I had been doing and what our strategy in Singida was. And he said, well, I have a bunch of churches and other groups that would love to partner with you if you want to formalize this. So we've done now, these 36 projects are typically, we raise half the money and they raise half the money. And then their construction company builds the entire project now. They drill the well, they build the tower, they oversee it. And then they also now have community development officers, which is sort of the software to help the communities understand what sustainability really means and what they're expected to do, and how we can be a resource with them. And now increasingly, thankfully, the government can be for the village a resource.
So these community development officers are there when you're not, and nobody from they're the ones who can do the continued sort of training and answer questions.
Yeah, and they're all Tanzanians, and many of them are from these districts originally, and
wonderful.
They almost all have either a full university degree or a junior college degree in sort of community development.
That's wonderful. So if I were, let's say I'm a businessman, which I guess I kind of am, but a real businessman like you, Dean, and I heard about this, and I said, look, you figured out water was the key. That's the first thing. You get it. Clean water is the first thing you have to work on if you're interested in community development and really helping communities sort of escape this sort of dire poverty.
Right.
What's the next thing, Dean? What if I were to come out? I wanted to like layer on to the foundation you've laid by helping these communities develop access to clean water. What should I do?
Well, I have another, this is kind of, again, my business thing, trying to boil things down into sort of concepts and models. So I have a way to think about what you're talking about. I call it the human development pyramid. And at the base of the pyramid is clean water. It's the most important sort of foundation for development that, without clean water, nothing else works very well. On top of the base, so at the base of the pyramid is clean water. So do a water project. If you want to help a single village, you do the water project first. Then the next step is food security. So right after water, you can live a lot longer without food than you can without water. It's days versus weeks or months. So food security, and there are all sorts of agricultural methods and demonstration farms and extension efforts, fertilizer, et cetera, that can dramatically increase agricultural yields and then directly increase farmers' income. So food security is next. Third, as you're going up the pyramid, is healthcare, simple healthcare. So on top of clean water, solving half the healthcare, you can now solve probably another quarter. And this is just my opinion. I can't quote, the WHO or the World Bank on this. If you provide simple bandages, clean wipes, you have a dispensary with somebody that has some training and knowledge so that you can prevent infections and simple things. And then beyond that, if you really can get things going and have a donor that's motivated by this, building a small clinic, which you can hire the community, the government would then staff with a government nurse. You can accomplish a lot. And ultimately, if you can get a doctor there, that's even better. So healthcare is the next step on the pyramid. And that above healthcare then is education, right? So Tanzania is pretty much universal. It's very good. One of the good things, the socialist founder, he was a school teacher and he really focused a lot of the government's efforts on literacy. And so Tanzania was way ahead of many African countries as far as free grade school. And now they're pushing it into middle school. And I think ultimately they'll have high school for everyone that can go. So education. And then finally, at the top of the pyramid, which a lot of people want to start with, is economic development, things to, business development, microfinance, all sorts of great ideas. But what my observation and experience in 20 plus years in Africa is if you don't have clean water, your efforts in economic development are going to fail. Your efforts in healthcare will fail. Your efforts in education will fail. And your efforts in agricultural security will fail. So, that's why I'm so focused on water.
That's a very interesting insight because I think, some of the bloom is off the microfinance rows, for instance. And I wonder if that's part of the reason why. Let me shift away just from Tanzania then to your just more broadly about sort of what advice you might have for other other business people, let's say, like you, who've had very successful careers. Maybe they read Halftime by Bob Buford and are thinking about how they're going to have significance. How would you suggest sort of you probably have a model for this, knowing you, Dean, like how do you, break up your philanthropy? Like, should 100% of it be overseas? In your mind, do you owe a certain sort of percentage of your giving to your own, to the local community or your own sort of to your faith commitments? How do you think about sort of how you divvy up your giving?
Right. I hope people don't take this the wrong way, but I don't believe I owe anything to anyone to start with. But because of my beliefs and my life, I want to use the gifts that I've been given to help and improve other people's lives. So given that, what I did was do something that I was excited to go to Africa. If it doesn't excite you to go to Africa, go to South America or go to the South Bronx or go to South Chicago. Go someplace that you've always thought is a place you might have an impact. Because that starting germ of someplace that you've always thought you wanted to go, even just to see, knowing that it's impoverished, if you kind of have a love for the place to start with, then you're going to have a much easier love for the people and willingness to jump in the deep end and try and solve problems. And they need money, but they need brain power. They need help in solving very complex problems. And we can't do it by ourselves. I learned that early. We just don't know anything about their culture. So we bring solutions, but they have to be filtered through the local culture. And patience is not something Americans are known for. And in this work, I had to learn patience. And so that's the first thing, is go do something that you've always had an inkling for, kind of an inner voice. And then really just take a step. But don't let anyone pull you into their idea. Follow your own path. Ask a lot of questions. Spend a year or two just taking the temperature, trying to figure out where you think, given your life experience and your motivations, you can make the biggest difference. Then just start doing it. And be willing to fail. It's just like starting a business. If you don't fail a bit, you'll never create the big opportunity. So
right.
Those are some of the things. And I'd say the other thing is measure output. If you are focused on the output, how many people benefit, how many hours are saved, all those sorts of things, then you'll solve problems in a way that actually accomplishes that. But if you start out, how do I raise $1 million? Well, that's the wrong question. How do I save 100,000 lives?
Right.
Or how do I get clean water to 100,000 or 2,000 or 5,000? Everyone has different gifts and resources. I can't solve the world's water problem. I can't solve Tanzania's water problem, but I can, with my network, solve this district's water problem. And that's really my goal the next 5 years, is to complete the project of equipping every village in the district with a functioning water system. And we're about our efforts. As you mentioned, I've done 35 projects. And then we've influenced another 15 new projects to be done by third parties. Mm-hmm. So 50 of, let's call it 75 villages, have relatively new systems. And of the 25, probably 10 have some sort of system that's working or could be working that we'll have to rehabilitate, upgrade, replace diesel engines and diesel pumps with solar. And then there's still maybe 10 to 15 villages we have to do. So we're in the process of quantifying what that means. Is that $500,000? Is it $1 million? What is the number? And then, okay, how fast can we do that over 5 years, which is my goal, is to finish this over the next 5 years.
Once again, it strikes me that the key to your success, one of the keys, I think there are a few that you've discussed, is just the limited scale at which you're trying to work, to limit the vision and to go to something that can actually be done. And it isn't just high-flown rhetoric about changing the world, but it's really focused on a particular place, particular people. It's very grounded there, as you say, filtered through local knowledge and local culture.
Yeah, and in the end, it's about 200,000 people that will benefit from this. I also think there's some synergy by concentrating this in the poorest district, in one of the poorest countries. One, there's some demonstration impact to other organizations. I've not run into another one that is as focused as we are. So I think there's a demonstration effect, and I think in the district that there will be some multiplier effects when the whole district is no longer searching for water.
Right.
I don't know what those are, and after the fact, maybe I'll discover and be able to measure them. But I just believe they exist now.
Yeah, sometimes you have to take a little bit of a leap of faith that there will be other things to measure in the future. Dean, if people want to support Tanzania Water Fund or know more about it, they just go to World Serve International.
No, they can go. We have a website, not much of one, to be honest. That's on my list of things to improve. And it'll give, the address here. It's a box in Scottsdale that they can send a check to the Tanzania Water Fund.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for the work you're doing, and thanks for taking time to speak with us today, Dean.
Well, Jeremy, I appreciate being invited and a chance to tell this story. And I think that I'm excited that the recording of this will be an opportunity for us to kind of share the broader thinking to people that I don't get a chance to meet. So thank you.
Dean Riesen, Chairman of the Tanzania Water Fund, thank you so much. Take care.
Take care. Thanks.